The Saturday afternoon sunlight was streaming through the windows of Baby Lux on Miami's Design District when Gabrielle Mitchell walked through the doors at 2:15, 7 months pregnant and glowing with the kind of contentment that came from finally being able to shop for the daughter she and her husband had been trying to have for 3 years. She was 34 years old, wearing a flowing maxi dress in deep emerald green that accommodated her growing belly, her natural hair styled in soft locks that fell past her shoulders, and minimal jewelry except for the 5-carat diamond on her left hand and the platinum wedding band beneath it. She carried a Bottega Veneta tote and wore flat sandals because her feet had been swelling lately and comfort had become more important than fashion. Baby Lux was the premier destination in Miami for high-end baby furniture and accessories, the kind of place where a crib could cost $12,000 and a changing table was a work of art, where expectant parents from Fisher Island and Star Island came to furnish nurseries that would be featured in Architectural Digest. Gabrielle had been planning this trip for weeks, had made a list on her phone of everything she wanted to see. The Italian cribs with hand-carved details, the organic mattresses that cost more than most people's cars, the designer bedding and the custom gliders and the bassinets that looked like they belonged in a palace. She and her husband Marcus had already decided on a budget of $80,000 for the nursery, a number that would have seemed absurd to Gabrielle 10 years ago when she was finishing her MBA and working in brand management at a consumer goods company. But that now felt reasonable given Marcus's success as a founder and CEO of a private equity firm that managed $18 billion in assets. Marcus Mitchell was one of the wealthiest black men in Florida, had been profiled in Fortune and Bloomberg, and had recently purchased a waterfront estate in Coral Gables, where they were creating a nursery that Gabrielle had been designing for months with the help of an interior decorator. Marcus had wanted to come with her today, but he was in New York for a series of meetings, and Gabrielle had assured him she was fine shopping alone, that she wanted to take her time browsing and touching things and imagining their daughter in the spaces she was creating. She had arrived at Baby Lux with excitement and anticipation, ready to spend the afternoon making decisions and placing orders, ready to feel the reality of becoming a mother settle more deeply into her bones. But within 30 seconds of entering the store, Gabrielle felt that excitement begin to curdle into something else, something familiar and unwelcome. She had been greeted at the door by a young white woman in her 20s, name tag reading Brittany, who had glanced at Gabrielle with an expression that Gabrielle had learned to read over a lifetime of navigating predominantly white spaces, an assessment that took in her pregnancy, her race, her age, and reached a conclusion about her purchasing power, her sophistication, her right to be in a store that catered to the ultra-wealthy. The greeting was polite but perfunctory, lacking the warmth and enthusiasm that Gabrielle had seen Brittany offer to the white couple who had been leaving as Gabrielle entered. "Welcome to Baby Lux," Brittany said, her smile practiced, but not reaching her eyes. "Let me know if I can help you find anything." Gabrielle returned the smile, said thank you, and began to wander through the showroom, which was arranged like a series of staged nurseries, each one displaying a different style and price point, though even the budget-friendly options started at $15,000 for a complete room. She paused at a crib made of sustainably sourced walnut, with hand-carved moon and stars on the headboard, ran her hand along the smooth wood and checked the price tag, $11,800. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of piece she had been imagining, and she took out her phone to photograph it from several angles. Brittany appeared at her elbow, seemingly materialized from nowhere, and said in a tone that Gabrielle could only describe as carefully patronizing, "That's one of our premium pieces. It's really stunning, isn't it? But I should mention it's quite expensive. We do have some more affordable options in the back if you'd like me to show you those." Gabrielle looked at her, felt the irritation rise but kept her voice pleasant. "I'm fine browsing the premium pieces, thank you. This is actually exactly what I'm looking for." Brittany's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, I just want to make sure you're aware of the pricing. That particular crib is almost $12,000, and that's just for the crib itself, not including the mattress or bedding or any of the other furniture. A complete nursery package with pieces from this collection would run about $70,000 to $80,000. There it was, the assumption laid bare, that Gabrielle could not afford it, that she needed to be warned about the prices before she got too invested in something beyond her means, that a black woman in a maxi dress shopping alone on a Saturday afternoon Must be here by mistake or on a fantasy shopping trip, rather than as a serious customer with serious money to spend. Gabrielle felt the anger flash hot and immediate, but she forced herself to take a breath, to give Brittany one more chance before she made this into something larger. "I appreciate the information," Gabrielle said, her voice steady but with an edge now. "I'm aware of the pricing and I'm prepared to purchase a full nursery today. What I'd like from you is assistance with understanding the different collections, delivery timelines, and customization options. Can you help me with that, or should I speak with someone else?" Brittany's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise followed by something defensive. "I can definitely help you," she said. "I just want to make sure we're on the same page about investment level. We also have payment plans available if that would be helpful. Many of our customers take advantage of those for the larger purchases." And there it was, the second assumption, even more insulting than the first. Gabrielle was not just being warned about prices, she was being offered a payment plan, being categorized as someone who could not pay in full, someone who needed financing to afford what was being sold in this store. Gabrielle felt the last of her patience evaporate, felt the decision crystallize. This was not going to be ignored, this was not going to be explained away as a misunderstanding, this was discrimination, clear and unambiguous, and Gabrielle was going to make sure it was addressed. If you are reading this and thinking about the ways that assumptions about wealth and worthiness are made based on race, about how black women are perpetually underestimated and dismissed regardless of their actual circumstances, about the exhaustion of having to prove yourself in spaces that should welcome your business, then you understand why Gabrielle Mitchell stood in that baby store feeling her excitement turn to rage. This is a story about what happens when someone with resources and determination decides to fight back, about the institutions that protect discriminatory practices, and about the cost of demanding to be seen and respected as fully human. Gabrielle looked at Brittany, let the silence stretch for a beat, and then said, voice calm but cold, "I need to speak with your manager. Now." Brittany's face flushed, a splotchy red that spread from her neck to her cheeks. "I'm sorry if I said something to upset you. I was just trying to be helpful to make sure you understood all your options." "Your manager," Gabrielle repeated, not moving, not backing down. "Now please." Brittany hesitated, seemed to consider arguing, and then turned and walked quickly toward the back of the store, disappearing through a door marked "Staff Only." Gabrielle stood beside the walnut crib, her hands resting protectively on her belly, and she pulled out her phone and opened the voice memo app. She had learned, over the years of navigating microaggressions and outright discrimination, to document everything, to create records that could not be dismissed or denied. She hit record and spoke quietly into the phone. Saturday, October 14th, 2:25 p.m., Baby Lux in Miami Design District. Sales associate named Brittany assumed I couldn't afford premium furniture, directed me to budget options, offered payment plan without me asking about financing, making these assumptions based on my appearance while I'm clearly here to shop seriously, requesting to speak with manager. She stopped the recording, saved it with a timestamp, and waited. Around her, the store continued its quiet hum of activity. Other customers browsing, sales associates offering assistance in tones that were warm and enthusiastic, and not at all like the tone Brittany had used with her. Gabrielle noticed, with growing anger, that those customers were all white, all dressed in variations of the casual, wealthy uniform that signaled belonging in spaces like this. She wondered how many black customers came through this store, how many had been subjected to the same assumptions, how many had simply left rather than making a scene. The manager who emerged from the back was a white woman in her 40s, professionally dressed in a sheath dress and heels, her blonde hair in a smooth bob, her expression carefully neutral. She approached Gabrielle with a smile that was meant to be placating, meant to diffuse whatever situation Brittany had warned her about. "Hello, I'm Susan Carmichael, the store manager. I understand there's been some confusion. How can I help you?" Gabrielle noted the word choice, confusion, the framing that suggested a misunderstanding rather than misconduct. "There's no confusion," Gabrielle said. "Your sales associate made assumptions about my ability to pay based on my appearance, warned me about prices without me asking, directed me to budget options, and offered me a payment plan. I'm 7 months pregnant. I'm here to furnish a nursery, and I'm prepared to spend upwards of $80,000 today. But I'm being treated like I wandered in from the street and need to be managed out of the store." Susan's smile faltered, and her eyes darted to Brittany, who was hovering a few feet away looking miserable. "I'm so sorry if Brittany's approach came across that way. She's new, and she's still learning how to read customers and gauge their needs." "I'm sure she didn't mean any offense." "I'm sure she did," Gabrielle said flatly, "because I've been in enough stores, had enough interactions like this to know what I'm seeing." She looked at me, saw a black woman, and decided I couldn't afford to shop here. "And now you're trying to explain it away rather than acknowledging that what happened was discriminatory." Susan's expression became more guarded, more defensive. "I can assure you, we don't discriminate at Baby Lux. We serve customers of all backgrounds, and we're committed to providing excellent service to everyone who walks through our doors. If Brittany's approach was off, I apologize, but I don't think it's fair to call it discrimination." Gabrielle felt the anger sharpen, felt the familiar calculus of whether to push or to walk away, whether this fight was worth the energy it would take, whether anything would change, or whether she would just exhaust herself for no gain. But she also thought about her daughter, about the world she would grow up in, about the assumptions people would make about her, and she made a decision. "I'd like to speak with the owner," Gabrielle said, "and I'd like to file a formal complaint. And I'd like you to know that I'm going to document this entire interaction, and I'm going to make sure people understand what kind of treatment black customers receive in this store." Susan's face went pale and she said, voice dropping lower, "Ma'am, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me offer you a discount on whatever you'd like to purchase today as a gesture of goodwill. 20% off your entire order. Does that sound fair?" It was, Gabrielle understood, an attempt to buy her silence, to make the problem go away with money. And part of her, the part that was tired and pregnant and just wanted to shop for her baby, was tempted to take it, to accept the discount and move on. But the larger part of her, the part that had been dealing with this kind of treatment her entire life, knew that accepting the discount would mean nothing would change, that the next black woman who walked in would face the same assumptions, that silence was complicity. "I don't want a discount," Gabrielle said. "I want accountability. I want to speak with the owner, and I want you to acknowledge that what happened here was wrong." Susan stared at her for a long moment, and Gabrielle could see the calculation happening, the weighing of whether to double down or to capitulate, whether this customer was worth the trouble or whether it was easier to appease her. Finally, Susan said, "The owner isn't available right now, but I can give you her contact information. Her name is Patricia Landon. You can reach out to her directly." She pulled a business card from her pocket, wrote a phone number on the back and handed it to Gabrielle. Gabrielle took it, looked at the card and said, "I'll be calling her, and I'll be sharing this experience publicly, because people deserve to know what kind of business this is." She turned and walked out of the store, leaving behind the beautiful walnut crib and the nursery she had been so excited to create, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins and the tears prickling at her eyes. She made it to her car, a white Tesla Model X parked in the lot behind the store, before she let herself cry, before she let the anger and the hurt spill over into sobs that shook her whole body. She sat in the car for several minutes, breathing, trying to calm down, trying to think about what to do next. Then she pulled out her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and relaxed. "Hey, babe, how's the shopping going?" Gabrielle tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat and all that came out was a choked sound. Marcus's tone changed immediately, became sharp with concern. "Gabrielle, what's wrong? Are you okay? Is it the baby?" "The baby's fine," Gabrielle managed to say. "I'm fine, physically. But Marcus, something happened at the store. I need to tell you about it." She recounted the encounter, her voice steadying as she moved through the details, and by the time she finished, she could hear the cold fury in Marcus's silence. When he spoke, his voice was tight, controlled. "I'm on the next flight home. I'll be there in 4 hours. And Gabrielle, we're not letting this go. We're going to make sure they understand exactly what they did." They talked for a few more minutes, and then Gabrielle drove home to the Coral Gables estate, a sprawling Mediterranean revival on 2 acres, with a pool and a tennis court and a view of Biscayne Bay. The house had been a recent purchase, a celebration of Marcus's latest fundraising, $9 billion, and they had been in the process of making it their own, of creating spaces that felt like them rather than like the previous owners. The nursery was on the 2nd floor overlooking the water, and Gabrielle had been working with a decorator to create a space that was elegant but warm, sophisticated but playful, the kind of room where her daughter could grow and dream and feel endlessly loved. But standing in that empty room now, Looking at the paint swatches and the fabric samples and the mood board she had created, Gabrielle felt the joy of it all tainted by what had happened at Baby Lux, by the knowledge that even here, even in this moment of anticipation and hope, she was not free from the assumptions and the judgments, that her blackness would always be a factor in how she was seen and treated. She sank into the glider that was the one piece of furniture already in the room, a temporary one they had bought while they waited to order the custom piece, and she let herself feel the full weight of the afternoon, the exhaustion of always having to fight, of never being allowed to just be, of carrying the burden of representation and resistance, even when all she wanted was to shop for her daughter. Marcus arrived home at 6:30, came straight to the nursery, and pulled Gabrielle into his arms, holding her while she cried again, this time with the relief of not being alone, of having someone who believed her without question, who was as angry as she was, who would fight with her and for her. When she finally pulled back, Marcus said, "Tell me what you want to do. Do you want to let it go, find a different store, move on, or do you want to fight?" Gabrielle looked at him, at this man she had married 5 years ago, who had built an empire through brilliance and determination, and who used his success to create opportunities for others, who funded scholarships and mentored young black entrepreneurs and served on boards of organizations working on economic justice. She knew what he would support, knew that he would stand with her no matter what she chose, but she also knew that he understood the cost of fighting, understood that it would take time and energy and emotional labor. "I want to fight," she said, "not just for me, but for everyone who walks into that store or stores like it and gets treated the way I was treated. I want them to know that there are consequences for discrimination. I want them to have to change." Marcus nodded. "Then we fight. And we do it right. We document everything, we get lawyers involved, we make it public if we need to, and we make sure they can't just apologize and move on without making real changes." Over the next several days, Marcus and Gabrielle assembled their strategy. They hired an attorney, a woman named Rachel Stern who specialized in civil rights and consumer discrimination, and they met with her in her office in downtown Miami to lay out what had happened and to understand their options. Rachel listened, took notes, and then said, "You have a strong case. What happened to you is textbook disparate treatment based on race. The question is what you want to get out of this. Do you want financial compensation? Do you want policy changes? Do you want public acknowledgement?" Gabrielle had thought about this, had talked it over with Marcus, and she said, "I want all of it. I want them to compensate me for the harm and the humiliation. I want them to change their policies and training so this doesn't happen to other people. And I want them to acknowledge publicly that they engaged in discriminatory practices. I don't want this to be swept under the rug with a quiet settlement." Rachel nodded. "Then we start with a demand letter. We lay out what happened, we cite the relevant laws, and we make clear what we're asking for. We give them a chance to respond and to make things right. If they don't, we file a lawsuit and we go public. And I'll be honest with you, this is going to get messy. They're going to hire their own lawyers. They're going to try to paint you as opportunistic or oversensitive. They're going to dig into your life, looking for anything they can use to discredit you. Are you prepared for that?" Gabrielle glanced at Marcus, saw the determination in his face, and said, "Yes, I'm prepared." Rachel drafted the demand letter, a detailed document that recounted the incident, cited Florida's civil rights statutes and federal laws prohibiting discrimination in public accommodations, and demanded a written apology, compensation for emotional distress, and a commitment to implementing anti-discrimination training and oversight. The letter was sent via certified mail and email to Baby Lux, addressed to Patricia Landon, the owner, and copied to the store's registered agent. The response came a week later, a letter from Baby Lux's attorneys that was dismissive and defensive. The letter denied that any discrimination had occurred, stated that the sales associate had been following standard customer service protocols, and suggested that Gabrielle had misinterpreted a well-intentioned attempt to provide information about pricing and financing options. The letter ended with a statement that Baby Lux would not be making any payments or admissions of wrongdoing, and that if Gabrielle chose to pursue legal action, the company would defend itself vigorously. Gabrielle read the letter and felt the anger reignite, felt the frustration of being gaslit, of being told that what she had experienced was not real, was not discrimination, was just a misunderstanding. She handed the letter to Marcus, who read it with an expression of cold fury, and then they called Rachel. "We file the lawsuit," Gabrielle said, "and we go public. If you have been following Gabrielle's journey, if you have felt the sting of being told that your experience of discrimination is not real, that you are too sensitive or misinterpreting or looking for problems, then you understand why she made the choice to escalate rather than retreat. This is not just about one incident or one store. It is about the larger pattern of how black women are treated in spaces of wealth and consumption, about the assumptions that strip away dignity and respect, and about the courage it takes to demand accountability. And if this story resonates with you, if you see yourself or your community in Gabrielle's experience, then share it, talk about it. Let it be part of the larger conversation about justice and equity in all the places we shop and live and exist. The lawsuit was filed in Miami-Dade County Circuit Court in early November, and Rachel ensured that it was accompanied by a press release that laid out the facts of the case and Gabrielle's reasons for pursuing legal action. The press release was picked up by local media first, then by national outlets, and within 48 hours, the story was trending on social media under the hashtag #ShoppingWhileBlack. The response was immediate and polarized. Many people expressed support for Gabrielle, shared their own stories of being profiled and dismissed in retail spaces, and called for boycotts of Baby Lux until the company addressed the discrimination. Several high-profile black women, including a few celebrities, tweeted their support and urged their followers to stand with Gabrielle. But there was also backlash, comments accusing Gabrielle of being opportunistic, of using her husband's wealth to bully a small business, of making everything about race when it might have been innocent. Some commenters questioned whether the incident had even happened the way Gabrielle described it, suggested that she was exaggerating or lying to get attention or money. Gabrielle tried not to read the comments, but it was impossible to completely avoid them, and each negative one felt like a small cut, a reminder that fighting for justice meant opening yourself up to judgment and attack. Marcus hired a social media consultant to monitor the conversation and to flag threats or particularly egregious harassment, and the consultant reported that while the majority of the response was supportive, there was a vocal minority that was vicious and personal, including threats and racist slurs. "Do you want to step back?" Marcus asked one evening as they sat in the living room, Gabrielle with her feet up on the couch and Marcus rubbing them gently. "We can let Rachel handle it from here. Keep you out of the public eye." Gabrielle thought about it, felt the temptation of retreat, of protecting herself and her daughter from the ugliness. But she also thought about the other women who had reached out, who had shared their stories, who had thanked her for speaking up, and she said, "No, I'm not stepping back. I started this, and I'm going to see it through." In December, Baby Lux's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that Gabrielle had not suffered any actual damages, that the sales associate's comments did not rise to the level of discrimination, and that the case was frivolous and should be thrown out. Rachel filed a response, laying out case law and precedent, arguing that the disparate treatment Gabrielle had experienced was exactly what civil rights laws were designed to address, and that the motion to dismiss should be denied. The hearing on the motion was scheduled for mid-January, and Gabrielle and Marcus attended, sitting in the courtroom while lawyers argued back and forth about whether the case had merit. The judge, a black woman in her 50s named Judge Alicia Monroe, listened to both sides, asked pointed questions, and then took the matter under advisement, saying she would issue a ruling within 30 days. During the wait, Gabrielle continued to receive messages from people who had shopped at Baby Lux or similar stores and had their own experiences of discrimination. She started compiling these stories with permission from the people who shared them, creating a document that Rachel planned to use as evidence of a pattern if the case went to trial. The stories were heartbreaking and infuriating. Black mothers told that cribs were probably out of their price range. Latina women followed around stores by security. Asian customers asked repeatedly if they needed help in a way that felt more like surveillance than service. One story in particular stuck with Gabrielle. A woman named Tanya Robinson, who lived in Miami and worked as a nurse, had gone to Baby Lux when she was pregnant with her first child. She had saved for months to be able to afford the nursery furniture she wanted, had walked in with a check for $15,000, ready to make a purchase. But the sales associate had been dismissive, had shown her only the cheapest options, and when Tanya had insisted on seeing the premium pieces, had made comments about whether Tanya was sure she could afford them. Tanya had left the store in tears, had bought her furniture elsewhere and had never forgotten the humiliation. Gabrielle reached out to Tanya, asked if she would be willing to provide a statement for the lawsuit, and Tanya agreed immediately. "I've been waiting for someone to hold them accountable," Tanya said on the phone. "What happened to you happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to so many others. If my story can help, I want to be part of this." In late January, Judge Monroe issued her ruling. The motion to dismiss was denied. In her written opinion, the judge stated that Gabrielle had adequately alleged facts that, if proven, would constitute discrimination based on race, and that the case would proceed to discovery. It was a significant victory, and Rachel called Gabrielle immediately to share the news. "This is huge," Rachel said, her excitement evident. "The judge is taking this seriously, and now we get to move into discovery, which means we can subpoena records, take depositions, and really dig into whether this is an isolated incident or a pattern. They're going to fight us every step of the way, but we have the upper hand now." Discovery was a months-long process, and it was grueling. Rachel and her team subpoenaed Baby Lux's training materials, employee handbooks, customer service records, and communications between management and staff. They deposed Brittany, the sales associate, and Susan Carmichael, the manager, and Patricia Landon, the owner. And they interviewed former employees who confirmed that there had been informal practices and unwritten rules about how to interact with customers based on their appearance, about being more vigilant with black and brown customers, about steering them toward cheaper options. One former employee, a young black woman named Jasmine Miller, who had worked at Baby Lux for 6 months before quitting, provided particularly damaging testimony. In her deposition, she described being told by Susan Carmichael to keep an eye on black customers, to make sure they weren't shoplifting, to be cautious about letting them browse high-end items without supervision. Jasmine said she had objected, had pointed out that the practice was discriminatory, and had been told that she was being too sensitive, that it was just good business practice. "I left because I couldn't be part of it," Jasmine said in the deposition. "I couldn't watch my own people being treated like criminals just for walking into a store, and I'm glad someone is finally calling them out." The discovery process also revealed internal communications that were shocking in their explicit bias. In one email chain between Susan Carmichael and Patricia Landon, Susan had written, "We had a lot of browsers today who weren't serious buyers. Need to figure out how to screen better up front, so we're not wasting time on people who can't afford our products." Patricia had responded, "Agreed. Train your team to read the room and focus energy on clients who are likely to convert." The language was coded, but the intent was clear, and Rachel flagged the emails as key evidence that the discrimination Gabrielle had experienced was not isolated, but was part of a broader pattern and practice. By the time the case was set for trial in September, nearly a year after the initial incident, Rachel had built a compelling case that Baby Lux had engaged in systematic discrimination, that the treatment of Gabrielle was consistent with how the store treated black customers generally, and that the company's leadership had been aware of and complicit in the discriminatory practices. But before the trial could begin, Baby Lux's attorneys reached out to Rachel about the possibility of settlement. The company, facing mounting legal costs, negative publicity, and the prospect of a trial that would air their discriminatory practices publicly, was ready to negotiate. The settlement discussions took place over several weeks, with offers and counteroffers exchanged, with Rachel pushing for not just financial compensation, but meaningful changes to the company's policies and practices. Gabrielle was clear about what she wanted: an admission of wrongdoing, a public apology, a significant financial settlement that reflected the harm she had suffered, and a commitment to implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination training and oversight. Baby Lux resisted the public apology and the admission of wrongdoing, but Rachel was firm. "If you want to settle, you have to own what you did," she told the opposing attorneys. "My client is not interested in a settlement that allows you to sweep this under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. You discriminated against her, and you need to say so." In the end, Baby Lux agreed to a settlement that included all of Gabrielle's demands. The company would pay her $250,000 in compensation for emotional distress and harm to her dignity. They would issue a public apology, acknowledging that Gabrielle had been subjected to discriminatory treatment based on her race. They would implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for all employees, hire a diversity and inclusion consultant to review and revise their policies and establish an independent complaint process for customers who experience discrimination. And they would commit to annual reporting on their progress, with oversight from a monitor appointed by the court. The settlement was announced in October, exactly 1 year after the incident, and it was covered extensively in the media. Gabrielle gave an interview to the Miami Herald, speaking about why she had chosen to fight, what the settlement meant to her, and what she hoped would change as a result. "This was never about the money," Gabrielle said in the interview. "It was about being treated with dignity and respect. It was about making sure that the next black woman who walks into that store or any store doesn't have to go through what I went through. And it was about holding a company accountable for practices that were discriminatory and harmful. I'm proud of what we accomplished, and I'm hopeful that this will be a turning point for Baby Lux and for other retailers who need to examine how they treat customers of all races." Baby Lux issued its public apology as part of the settlement, a statement that was posted on the company's website and social media accounts. The statement read, in part, "We acknowledge that Gabrielle Mitchell was subjected to discriminatory treatment when she visited our store in October 2024. The assumptions made by our employee about Ms. Mitchell's ability to purchase our products were based on her race, and that was wrong. We apologize to Ms. Mitchell for the harm and humiliation she experienced, and we commit to doing better. We are implementing comprehensive changes to our training, policies, and practices to ensure that all customers are treated with the respect they deserve." The apology was met with mixed reactions. Some people praised Baby Lux for taking responsibility and committing to change. Others felt the apology was insufficient, that it had taken a lawsuit and a year of fighting for the company to acknowledge what should have been obvious from the start. But for Gabrielle, the apology was significant, a validation that what she had experienced was real and was wrong, and that she had been right to demand accountability. If you have walked with Gabrielle through this journey, from the moment she was offered a payment plan to this moment of hard-won acknowledgement, then you understand that this story is about more than one pregnant woman and one baby store. It is about the broader work of challenging assumptions, of demanding that institutions live up to their stated values, of refusing to be silent when you are treated with disrespect. And if this story has moved you, if it has inspired you to think about your own experiences, or the experiences of people you love, then share it, talk about it. Let it be part of the larger movement toward justice and dignity for all. The settlement required Baby Lux to hire a diversity and inclusion consultant, and the company brought in a firm called Equity Partners, run by a black woman named Dr. Simone Wallace, who had spent 2 decades working on racial equity in retail and hospitality. Dr. Wallace conducted a comprehensive audit of Baby Lux's operations, interviewing employees, observing customer interactions, reviewing training materials and policies, and analyzing data on customer service and sales by race. Her findings, delivered to Patricia Landon and the company's leadership in November, were sobering. The audit confirmed that black customers at Baby Lux were more likely to be questioned about their purchasing power, directed to lower-priced items, offered financing options without asking, and subjected to higher levels of surveillance than white customers. The disparities were statistically significant and consistent across the store's locations in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach. The audit also revealed that the company's training materials were vague and left room for interpretation, with language about reading customers and managing expectations that employees understood as code for profiling based on appearance. And the company culture, shaped by Patricia Landon's emphasis on conversion rates and sales metrics, had created an environment where employees felt pressure to focus their energy on customers they perceived as likely to make large purchases, which in practice meant prioritizing white customers over customers of color. Dr. Wallace presented her findings to the leadership team, along with a set of recommendations: comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees, revised customer service protocols that emphasized equal treatment regardless of appearance, diversification of the staff, including hiring people of color in management positions, and the creation of a customer feedback system that would allow people to report discriminatory treatment anonymously. Patricia Landon, who had been defensive and resistant throughout the lawsuit, was chastened by the audit findings. In a meeting with Dr. Wallace, she said, "I never thought of myself as someone who would run a discriminatory business. I thought we were treating everyone well, But seeing the data, hearing the stories, I realize I was wrong. I realize I created a culture that allowed this to happen, and I need to take responsibility for that. Dr. Wallace was encouraged by the shift in tone, but she also knew that words were easy, and change was hard. She worked with Baby Lux over the next several months to implement the recommendations, conducting training sessions, revising policies, and coaching managers on how to create a more inclusive environment. The training was intense, sometimes uncomfortable, with employees being asked to confront their own biases, to think about how their assumptions shaped their behavior, and to commit to doing better. Some employees embraced the training, saw it as an opportunity to grow and to be part of creating a better workplace. Others were resistant, complained that they were being accused of racism, argued that they were just trying to do their jobs. And a few, including Brittany, the sales associate who had profiled Gabrielle, left the company, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new expectations. Brittany's departure was not a surprise, and Patricia Landon did not try to stop her. "I think for some people the changes we're making are too much," Patricia said in a conversation with Dr. Wallace, "and I'm okay with that. I'd rather have a smaller team that's committed to our values than a larger team that includes people who are going to continue to discriminate." By the spring of 2026, a year and a half after the incident, Baby Lux was a different store. The staff was more diverse, the training was ongoing, and the culture had shifted in ways that were visible to customers. Reviews on social media and Yelp began to reflect the changes, with several black customers noting that they had been treated with respect and professionalism, that the atmosphere felt welcoming, that they felt seen and valued. One review, from a woman named Keisha Thompson, stood out. "I visited Baby Lux last month, and I was nervous because I'd heard about what happened to Gabrielle Mitchell, and I wasn't sure if I'd be treated the same way. But I was blown away by the service." The sales associate, a young black woman named Shanice, greeted me warmly, listened to what I was looking for, and spent over an hour showing me different options without once making me feel like I couldn't afford them. I ended up spending $12,000 on a nursery set, and I felt respected and valued the entire time. Whatever changes they've made, they're working. Gabrielle saw the review and felt a swell of pride and relief. The fight had been worth it. The stress and the scrutiny and the months of legal battles had led to real change, to a store that was better, to experiences for other black mothers that were different from what she had endured. But Gabrielle also knew that Baby Lux was just one store, that the issues she had faced were not unique to that location or that company, that there were thousands of retailers across the country where black customers were still being profiled and dismissed and treated as less than. And she began to think about what more she could do, how she could use her experience and her platform to push for broader change. She reached out to several other women who had shared their stories of discrimination in retail, including Tanya Robinson, the nurse who had testified in the lawsuit, and proposed the creation of an advocacy organization. They called it Shop with Dignity, and the mission was to document incidents of retail discrimination, to support people who wanted to file complaints or take legal action, and to work with retailers to implement policies and practices that ensured equal treatment for all customers. The organization launched in June 2026, with Gabrielle as the founder and Tanya as the executive director. They started small with a website where people could share their stories, a hotline for reporting incidents, and partnerships with civil rights organizations that could provide legal support. But the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first month, they received over 500 reports of discrimination from people across the country, detailing experiences in stores ranging from luxury boutiques to big-box retailers. The stories were heartbreaking and enraging. Pregnant women told they couldn't afford maternity clothes. Teenagers followed around electronics stores. Elderly black people ignored by sales associates who assumed they were just browsing. Each story was a data point, evidence of a pattern, and Gabrielle and Tanya worked to compile them, to analyze them, to use them to advocate for change. They also reached out to major retailers, proposing partnerships where Shop with Dignity would work with companies to assess their practices, provide training, and help them create more inclusive environments. Some companies were receptive, saw the value in proactive change and in avoiding the kind of lawsuit and publicity that Baby Lux had endured. Others were defensive, insisted they didn't have problems, declined to engage. But slowly, steadily, the organization gained traction. They were invited to speak at industry conferences, were interviewed by media outlets, and became a resource for people navigating discrimination. And Gabrielle, who had started this journey simply wanting to shop for her daughter, found herself at the center of a movement, using her experience to create something larger, something that would outlast her own story. Her daughter, Maya, was born in December 2025, a healthy, beautiful girl with dark eyes and a full head of curly hair. The nursery, eventually furnished with pieces from a different store that had treated Gabrielle with warmth and respect, was everything she had imagined, a space filled with light and love, with a crib that Maya would sleep in and a glider where Gabrielle would rock her, and books that would be read aloud in the quiet of night. Gabrielle often sat in that glider, holding Maya, and thought about the world her daughter would grow up in. It would not be perfect, would not be free from bias or discrimination, but it would be a world where her mother had fought, where institutions had been forced to change, where the next generation of black children might face fewer assumptions, fewer barriers, fewer moments of being told they did not belong. And that, Gabrielle believed, was worth every moment of the fight, every ounce of the pain, every second of the exhaustion, because Maya would grow up knowing that her mother had refused to be silent, had demanded dignity and respect, and had used her voice and her resources to make the world a little bit better, and that was a legacy worth building. 3 years after the incident at Baby Lux, Shop with Dignity had grown into a national organization with a staff of 20, offices in 5 cities, and partnerships with over 100 retailers who had committed to implementing anti-discrimination practices. The organization had helped over 2,000 people file complaints, had provided legal support to dozens of lawsuits, and had seen significant settlements and policy changes at major companies. One of the organization's signature programs was the Dignity Certification, a designation that retailers could earn by demonstrating their commitment to equal treatment through comprehensive training, diverse staffing, transparent policies, and ongoing monitoring. The certification became a mark of distinction, something that progressive companies sought and that customers looked for when deciding where to shop. Baby Lux was one of the first companies to earn the certification, completing a rigorous assessment process and demonstrating sustained improvements in how they treated customers of all races. Patricia Landon, who had undergone her own transformation through the process, became an advocate for the work, speaking at industry events about her company's journey and encouraging other retailers to take discrimination seriously. At one such event, a conference in New York on diversity and inclusion in retail, Patricia shared the stage with Gabrielle. It was the first time they had been in the same room since the settlement, and the tension was palpable. But as they spoke, as Patricia acknowledged the harm her company had caused, and Gabrielle talked about the importance of accountability and change, something shifted. It was not forgiveness, exactly, not a resolution that erased what had happened, but a recognition that they were both part of a larger story, a story about how harm could become a catalyst for transformation. After the panel, Patricia approached Gabrielle privately and said, "I want you to know that I think about what happened to you every single day. It changed me, changed my company, and I'm grateful for that, even though I'm ashamed it took a lawsuit for me to see what I should have seen all along. Thank you for not giving up, for pushing us to be better." Gabrielle looked at her, saw the sincerity and said, "I appreciate you saying that, and I'm glad the changes are real, that they're lasting. That's what I wanted, what I fought for, so thank you for doing the work." They shook hands and it felt like closure, like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Marcus, who had been Gabrielle's partner through all of it, who had supported every decision and used his resources to fund Shop with Dignity's growth, was proud of what his wife had built. "You took something painful and turned it into something powerful," he told her one evening as they sat on the terrace of their home, watching Maya play in the yard with their second child, a son named Joshua, who had been born 2 years after Maya. "You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for everyone, and you won." Gabrielle smiled, watched her children, and felt the satisfaction of knowing that they were growing up in a world that was, in some small ways, better than the one she had inherited. "We won," she corrected. "You and me and everyone who stood with us. That's how change happens. Together." 5 years after the incident, Gabrielle was invited to speak at a summit on racial equity in consumer spaces, held in Washington, D.C., and attended by CEOs, policymakers, advocates, and activists from across the country. She stood on the stage and told her story one more time. The story of walking into baby Lux pregnant and excited and being met with assumptions that stripped away her dignity. I was offered a payment plan because the sales associate looked at me and decided I couldn't afford to pay in full, Gabrielle said. She looked at my skin, my clothes, my pregnant body, and she made a judgment about my worth. And that judgment was wrong, not just because I happened to have money, but because every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their financial situation. Every customer deserves to be welcomed, to be seen as a human being, to be given the benefit of the doubt. She paused, let the words sink in, and then continued. What happened to me was not unique. It happens every day, in stores across this country, to black people and brown people and people who don't look like what society has decided customers should look like. And it's not enough to say that we don't tolerate discrimination. We have to actively work to dismantle the systems and the assumptions that allow it to happen. We have to train employees, change policies, diversify leadership, and create cultures where discrimination is not just punished, but prevented. The room erupted in applause, and Gabrielle felt the power of that moment, the sense that the work she had started in anger and pain had become something larger, something that was touching lives and changing systems and building toward a future where her children and her children's children would face fewer barriers, fewer moments of being told they did not belong. And if you have journeyed with Gabrielle from that moment in the baby store to this moment of advocacy and impact, if you have seen how one woman's refusal to accept disrespect became a movement for dignity and justice, then you understand that change is possible, that fighting matters, that speaking up can shift systems. Carry this story with you, share it with others, let it inspire you to demand better in the spaces you occupy, to stand up for dignity and respect for all people, to build a world where assumptions give way to humanity and where everyone is welcomed and valued. 10 years after the incident, Shop with Dignity had grown into one of the leading civil rights organizations in the country, with a focus on consumer equity and retail justice. The organization had expanded its work beyond discrimination complaints to include policy advocacy, pushing for state and federal legislation that would strengthen protections for customers, require retailers to implement anti-discrimination training, and create accountability mechanisms for companies that engaged in discriminatory practices. Gabrielle testified before Congress, sharing her story and the stories of thousands of others who had experienced discrimination, and she worked with legislators to draft bills that would make real change. Some of the bills passed, some failed, but the conversation had shifted, and retail discrimination was no longer dismissed as a minor issue or a matter of individual bad actors. It was recognized as a systemic problem that required systemic solutions. Gabrielle also wrote a book titled Shopping While Black: One Woman's Fight for Dignity and the Movement That Followed. The book was part memoir, part call to action, and it became a bestseller, used in college courses on racial justice and in corporate training programs. The book tour took Gabrielle across the country, and at each stop, she met people who had their own stories, who thanked her for speaking up, who committed to continuing the work in their own communities. Maya and Joshua grew up knowing their mother's story, knowing that she had fought for justice, knowing that the work of creating a more equitable world was ongoing and required commitment from everyone. They were proud of her, inspired by her, and as they got older, they began to find their own ways to contribute to carry forward the legacy she had built. At Maya's 10th birthday party, held in the backyard of the Coral Gables estate with friends and family gathered around, Gabrielle watched her daughter blow out the candles on her cake and make a wish. Later, when they were alone, Maya said, "Mommy, I wish that no one would ever be treated the way you were treated in that store. I wish that everyone would be kind." Gabrielle felt the tears well up, pulled her daughter close and said, "That's a beautiful wish, baby. And you know what? We can make it come true, not just by wishing, but by working, by treating people with kindness and respect, by standing up when we see injustice, by being the change we want to see. That's how wishes come true." Maya nodded, serious and thoughtful, and Gabrielle knew that her daughter understood, that the lessons had taken root, that the next generation would carry the work forward. 15 years after the incident, Gabrielle was invited back to Baby Lux for a special event. The store, now under new ownership, but still committed to the changes that had been implemented, was celebrating the anniversary of receiving its dignity certification, and they wanted Gabrielle to be part of the celebration, to acknowledge the role her lawsuit and her advocacy had played in transforming the company. Gabrielle was hesitant at first, not sure she wanted to return to the place where she had experienced such pain. But Maya, now 15 and interested in social justice and activism, encouraged her. "Mom, you should go, you should let them honor what you did, and you should show people that change is real." So Gabrielle agreed, and she walked back into Baby Lux 15 years after she had walked out in tears. The store looked different, felt different. The staff was diverse, the atmosphere warm and welcoming, and when Gabrielle entered, she was greeted by the current manager, a young black woman named Alicia, who had been hired as part of the company's commitment to diversifying leadership. "Ms. Mitchell, it's an honor to have you here," Alicia said, shaking Gabrielle's hand warmly. "Your story changed this company, changed this industry. Thank you for not giving up, for demanding better." The event was attended by employees, customers and representatives from other retailers who had partnered with Shop with Dignity. There were speeches, testimonials, and a presentation of a plaque that would hang in the store, commemorating the journey from discrimination to dignity, from harm to healing. Gabrielle spoke briefly, her voice steady and strong. 15 years ago, I walked into this store excited to shop for my daughter, and I was met with assumptions that broke my heart. I could have walked away, could have let it go, but I didn't. I fought, and I'm so proud of what came from that fight. This store is different now, better now, and that matters. But my hope is that we don't stop here, that we keep working, keep pushing, keep building toward a world where no one has to fight for dignity because it's given freely to everyone. The room erupted in applause, and Gabrielle felt the fullness of the moment, the sense of having come full circle, of having transformed pain into purpose and hurt into hope. And as she stood in that store, surrounded by people who had been changed by her story, who were committed to continuing the work, Gabrielle Mitchell felt at peace. She had done what she set out to do. She had demanded accountability, created change, and built a legacy that would outlive her. And that was everything. If you have stayed with this story from beginning to end, if you have seen how Gabrielle took a moment of discrimination and transformed it into a movement for dignity, then you know that this work is never finished, that each of us has a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world. Take this story with you, share it with others, and commit to treating every person you encounter with the respect and dignity they deserve. Because that is how we honor the people who fought before us. That is how we create change in the present, and that is how we build a better future for the generations to come.